Hello, folks. My name is Andrew. Thanks for joining me on the last day of the summit. My voice is going, so I apologize in advance if it gets a little hoarse. And it's nice to see some familiar faces. I can't believe you're here at another session for Apache Atlas. It makes me very happy and encouraged. So we'll talk about that. I think the folks that have been here will notice that some of the content you may have seen earlier. We'll just go into more depth today, specifically around taxonomies. Since we don't have that many people in this room, if you have a quick question, feel free to ask. It's not a problem. If it's more involved or a little more detailed, we can talk about that perhaps after the session or outside in the lobby. But feel free to raise your hand and I'll do my best to answer. All right, so let's get started. It's me. You've seen me a couple times already. So this is the same format that I've had for the other sessions regarding Atlas. So we'll talk about a quick overview. I'll try to make it brief so you're not getting the same content again. We'll go over a near-term roadmap, and we'll focus, obviously, on the taxonomy pieces. I just put that up there so you just get it in context. And then we'll talk about specifically the taxonomy benefits, and then we'll have time for questions. If I can sneak in a video, a demo, I'll try to do that as well. Okay, so I think you guys have seen this slide before, but really the essential elements here are that Atlas came to be through a thing called the Data Governance Initiative. And really, it's a different way to develop an open source project. Typically, it's done organically. A group of really smart folks get together, they have a good idea, and they start a project with a champion and a sponsor. Here, we did the same thing. However, we worked with customers to really focus on, let me just go to the other side. There you go. We work with customers to really build out the capabilities that they would need for governance. So, typically the evolution of Hadoop adoption starts off with a POC, point of a proof of concept or a proof of technology, and then it gets perhaps scaled up to a point solution. But it's a very narrow use case, right? And then there's a third state, when we get to a place where we have multi-tenancy, lots of different types of data that have been traditionally in different silos get put together, right? And in that case, governance and security concerns really start to bubble up. And that's really when the stakes are a bit higher, right? So these customers were at that state, and they had a lot of common problems. So we took those specific problems and built the capabilities of Atlas. Now, have we finished all of those use cases? The answer is no, but we've made quite a bit of progress, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Okay, so these are our primary objectives, right? We want to make sure that we have good data management, we have good modeling with metadata, and we have interoperable solutions. Not all data is in Hadoop yet, and we want to make sure that while you move data in, you can make sure you have the continuity that you've had in the other systems, right? So, obviously the best practice that we suggest is to maintain the highest fidelity of the metadata that you have and try to, garner it from as close to the source as you can. And so, for that effort, we want to make sure that when you bring in that metadata, the structure of that metadata has a nice place to land. And that's really, kind of the elements that we're going to talk about today and one of the founding principles that we designed Atlas with, right? So really quickly, if you were to think about Atlas, if there's a takeaway here, after all of these sessions, and probably heard a lot of people talk for quite a few number of hours, if you think of Atlas, I'd like you to think about, metadata, right? Specifically metadata services. We want to use metadata to orchestrate and bring more, better management, better discipline and rigor to the larger enterprise, right? That's really what we're after, right? We want to make sure that we have cross-component lineage. We want to centralize it for everything inside of Hadoop. And this is a kind of a big, significant point. Hadoop tends to be a black box for applications and viewpoints outside of Hadoop, right? So, data magically goes in, something happens, and you pull some data out, right? But you really need that visibility inside too for proper governance, and we aim to provide that. And if we do this well, we'll have a single point of interface when you connect other systems to Hadoop, right? You don't want to connect to 30 different projects. There's 30 different sub-projects or more in Hadoop, and you don't want to be in the business of maintaining all of that, right? So we want to make sure that we make it easy, and you have one central place to do that. And by doing that, we actually get quite a bit of benefits from that, right? So it's more than just aggregation of that metadata. We can actually do much higher level things, much smarter things. And that's really what we're going to talk about, right? So we can do things like classification, right? We can build business catalogs. We can build tag-based or dynamic-based security, right? So just really quickly, the initial release, 0.5, had Hive metadata captured automatically. But in this coming release, which will come out in the summertime, we'll have this additional stuff too, right? So Scoop to connect to relational databases and pulling that data in for ingestion, Storm for stream processing, Kafka for messaging, Ranger we've already talked about several times in the other sessions, but really to have that centralized security, right? And Falcon for data lifecycle management. And all those components will report directly into Atlas through a thing we call hooks, or connectors, and we can talk about that in detail if you like. And then later this year, we'll also have Spark integration as well as NiFi, and we'll probably have one or two other ones we haven't quite announced yet. Okay, so kind of along the same theme that we've been talking about, what do we get from metadata? Well, we get scalability. One of the things that we talked about is management through metadata. And when we get to this larger third state of Hadoop adoption in this data lake, the sheer scale makes the management effort or the problem a little different, right? You need to use different ways to manage data, right? And we feel that the proper way to do that is through metadata, specifically using tools for discovery and security. That's what we're going to talk about today, right? Any questions? Kind of ran through that pretty quickly. I did a great job or a bad job, we'll see. Okay, so this is a familiar picture, and I kind of spiced it up with some brighter colors to focus in on a couple of areas. Oh, was there a question? Okay, so quickly, this is a high-level architecture. I'm not going to talk about all the components, just focus on a few that are relevant. The front door essentially is our REST APIs, and this is really important in as much as all of the native connectors that we have speak to Atlas through the REST APIs, and consequently things that are outside of Hadoop can communicate with Hadoop through these REST APIs. The front end also does. So basically anything you can do with the front end, you can do with through command lines or programmatically through the REST APIs. So that means integration to external systems was built from the beginning, right? We thought about that initially. So if you use an enterprise scheduler and you have a lot of business logic encapsulated in that scheduling, right, where you're going across components, well, now you can schedule activities and report on that activity for Hadoop as well, right? So now you can have that business logic be complete in that enterprise scheduler, right? Consequently, if you have a tool or proprietary tool that does some kind of metadata reporting, well, you can report that into Atlas too, right? So you can use all the features of Atlas, but you can also just use it simply for a metadata repository where we're putting data in, it's being managed properly, it's being replicated and all that stuff, and you can pull it out, with proper search and other types of related services, right? So that functionality is always there, right? Kind of related to that is this other thing in the orange box right down here, the type system. And many of you probably know exactly what that is, but essentially it allows you to have some agility, or quite a bit of agility in defining a type, right? And that type could be a physical type, like a Hive database, table and a column, right? So for that component, but it could also be something that's defined for a logical idea, right? You can have a department and sub-departments and other types of logical assets, right? And when we talk about conceptual, logical, and physical, that's kind of where it lands, right? So this is metadata. It's not the real data itself, but it's quite valuable, and it's because it is in our type system, we have quite a bit of flexibility, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. It sits on top of a graph database, and we have a very robust repository that it stores its data in. The benefit of that really is that we can quickly define relationships, and it's very flexible in that regard. So we can, we specialize in building these relationships, and it's really kind of tailor fit for the type of activity that we're doing with metadata structures, changing them really quickly, taking whole branches of a taxonomy and moving it around, and building new relationships. So that's why we picked that. It actually was, not an insignificant engineering task, which is kind of the reason why you see the functionality, jump from .5 to .6. We sorted a lot of that out, we hardened it a bit, and now we were able to go into higher level functions with .6. So I think you'll really be impressed with the additional features that we're adding. Okay.
Just a quick one, sorry.
Go ahead.
Which implementation of Graph database?
It's TitanDB.
Okay.
It is pluggable, although we don't officially support other types. We picked TitanDB primarily because it's Apache 2.0. Right? We try to maintain, obviously, consistent licensing throughout the whole package, so that you get to have all the legal options you have with Apache 2.0, which is quite liberal. I think it might be the most flexible licensing scheme out there, right? Okay, so we'll kind of talk specifically about discovery, how you can use this taxonomy for discovery, right? We talked about the conceptual, logical, and physical assets. That's, that's kind of some bucketing that a lot of other traditional tools use, but really you can just think of it as logical stuff and real stuff, right? And then security, right? This is kind of a neat thing. This is quite a bit of a differentiator for us. So now, instead of just having that tag and that taxonomy be something that you can use for discovery and consume, you can use that metadata to really build out a scalable, dynamic security policy that's actively protecting your data, right? And that's a huge difference from perhaps other ways of using this metadata. Instead of being just purely looking back and reporting on violations, we can actually prevent them, right? And because we use Ranger for centralized security, you can go to one place, manage your policies, and get your audits. We talked about that in the first session, and we have some Ranger folks here, so you can ask as many detailed questions as you like. But on the other side, the flip side, we talked about new ways to manage your data using metadata tools. Well, now because of Atlas, we can have many data stewards, right? They can be domain experts, and they can be the ones in charge of classifying the data that they're aware of, right? And that really makes the right sense. As you have this huge proliferation of data, it's going to be virtually impossible for one group to understand both, the platform side as well as the business side, right? In any kind of comprehensive way. So you're going to have natural groupings, right? So why not use that grouping and leverage that by creating roles such as a curator or a steward and have them do what they do best, right? Even if you develop a paper system, right, or any other ticketing system, eventually it's going to end up at the data domain expert anyway, right? So why not just give them the power to do that classification right away? They can control access, they can tag sensitive data, and automatically Ranger will be able to enforce that for active protection. And that's a huge benefit of having this taxonomy, right? And you can import this taxonomy from an existing system, right? So you can understand how powerful this can be. Okay, so near-term roadmap, this is just to put it in context. We talked about this. This is one of our big features that we're providing. It's cross-component lineage. So we provide lineage across these different components. As we talked about in the previous slide, we want to make sure that we're kind of harmonizing all the different data lineage across those components. And this is what we're going to be able to support in the summertime, right? So Scoop and anything that rides on top of Scoop, like Teradata Connector, will be supported. Kafka and Storm. So we have Storm topologies, and as you have a Kafka Bolt, we'll be able to support that workflow as well, right? And that's something that's pretty unique to Atlas. No other platform can provide that functionality and lineage right now. You have to use Atlas if you want to get that in an easy-to-consume way. And obviously, Apache Falcon and Hive and data flows between those components, right? And as I mentioned, custom activity reporter. Right? You can write to our APIs, and you can put whatever types of reporting that you'd like. Okay. All right, talked about business catalog already. So this new UI is going to be coming. you can expect another technical preview VM to be released probably towards the end of May-ish, so kind of hedge a little bit there. But really, that's going to be for taxonomy creation and classification, categorizing unclassified assets, and all those things that a data steward would do. We have a nice UI for that. And if you were here for the other session, you kind of understand the process that we went through. We did quite a bit of research. We did a lot of usability testing. So we really took great care in making sure that those activities, the roles were defined properly. It wasn't a trivial task. The whole role of a data curator or steward is kind of still emerging. So we wanted to make sure that we kind of understood the domain. Is it really just a bunch of former DBAs or developers or data scientists, or was it a new group of people basically like librarians? Is it information science? So we did quite a bit of research, and I think we've got a nice set of findings, right? So that was quite valuable for us to design the UI. Quick note about Metadata Exchange. Just want to underscore this point, which I've already made. So sorry to kind of beat the same point again. But basically, we want to be able to import taxonomies as well as data lineage and technical metadata, right? This is, it's all metadata, but this is just kind of breaking it down a little bit further. And these are the types of things that we want to capture really to get that continuity between the platforms, right? And that's really what you need for regulated industries. So in a former life, I worked for the NYSE Euronext. It's a major exchange. We were in 12 countries, 23 electronic markets. So we had a lot of data, and a lot of it was regulated, right? Basically, anything that's spit out of our matching engine had to be governed at a very strict level. So, obviously, those types of use cases were driven with these types of needs in mind. We tried to make sure that Atlas could adhere to those requirements, right? Governance certification. This is kind of an interesting idea. There's a lot of things that, Hortonworks we can enable, and there's other things that maybe are outside the scope of our mandate, right? And you probably have a lot of vendors or tools that you currently use. We don't want you to abandon them. We actually want to integrate with them, right? And they have very valuable metadata, right? So where we can, we will exchange metadata. There's an assumption, of course, that the other side is willing to give it up. But in terms of Hadoop, we're an open source project. We have open APIs. Any tool can go and grab metadata that we collect and use it, right? So definitely on our side, it's very much open and accessible. What we've done is we've worked with certain vendors to make sure that we're exchanging metadata correctly. And I'll just give you a good example. In that top bullet here, discovery and tagging, there's a couple of ways you want to ingest data, and you're going to need that tagging to build and make sure that your taxonomy is accurate. Because if it's not accurate, it won't be used, and of course, the value drops dramatically. However, if it is accurate and it does speed discovery, then it kind of has its own fuel, and it becomes quite a valuable tool. Well, one of the things that can be a barrier is categorizing a huge amount of data, right? You might have a lump of data that you've been sloshing around from platform to platform. Nobody really knows what's inside of it, and you may want to just dump it into Hadoop. Well, you can use a number of these tools that our vendors provide that can do interrogation. They can crack open the payload of that data and actually look inside. So instead of just guessing at the schema or trying to figure out what it is from externally, they can actually go inside, right? Some of those operations are costly, so you have to make sure that it's scheduled properly. But once it goes through that work, right, they have a bunch of MapReduce jobs that go through your data. They'll do some pattern matching algorithms. They have some machine learning built in. They can find easy stuff like personally identifiable or sensitive information. But you can also train them to find more proprietary information that might be specific to your organization. So they can do this. And having done this, now you can feed that discovery back into Atlas in the form of tags or other types of information, right? So an example in the US would be in a kind of a user-defined or a notes field where a user can put in anything they want. You might discover that there's a name or a social security number, right? Not easy to discover or figure out from a schema, but by going through that interrogation, you can find this. Well, now that tool can report back to Atlas that column, that specific column, not the, or a table or a database, but that specific column now contains PII information. And then we can dynamically change our policy to protect that data, right? So in the other talk that we had, we talked about the mechanisms by which we report to Ranger. Well, that will happen. That curator found that data and they just tagged it, and automatically it'll go through our messaging framework. It'll get pushed to Ranger. Ranger will do its thing and change the access policy. So now, dynamically, when users go and hit that data set, they'll actually be challenged by a new set of policies, right? So it's very powerful, and you can do that programmatically through these tools. So we've certified 2 vendors, Waterline and DataGuys. Right now we've got quite a few more in the pipeline that we're working with. So there's going to be quite a bit of integration. One of the things that's required to have the governance-ready certification is that they have to promise to be good citizens. As I mentioned before, they have to promise to exchange metadata, not just take it. So there is an SLA around that. They must report their findings to Atlas in a reasonable manner, just so that another tool can pick it up and do something, right? So one of the folks that we're talking with currently is Calibra. So you might have a workflow where we're doing some kinds of security checks or approvals, and they can then instrument that data set with a tag to allow data analysts to now access it, right? So it's a way of having these gates that you can create, right? So the thing that we need is we need that metadata to be accurate and updated reasonably. Question?
Yeah, Waterline can crawl the data sets.
Yes.
And potentially, I guess, therefore tag all of that data. So they can, what you're saying is they can then feed those tags into Atlas.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Consequently, DataGuys has capabilities to also do additional steps like encryption, right? So you can do format preserving encryption and some other options as well, right? As a consequence of that, right? So you've done some interrogation, you have some discovery, and now you need to take some action, right? Okay. So the point here is that we want to make sure that we have a rich ecosystem of tools, and some of these tools are quite innovative. And it's an opportunity for them to build, a differentiating capability rather than building a lot of broad stuff. So if they build this really cool interrogation capability, they can just focus on that. Atlas will take care of managing the metadata, right? We've got, the ability to replicate into the DR piece, and we have high resilience and all that stuff built in, so they don't have to worry about that. They can just focus on that differentiator. And it's really good for our customers because you can pick things a la carte now. You're not locked into this, large suite of tools which you may or may not like. So you have more flexibility there, right? So you can buy some, build some, and that's up to you now, right? The most important thing is, with this new scheme, you control your metadata, right? It's not in some proprietary format. It's in an open format in Hadoop on an open source project. It's yours, right? No one can take it. So if you want to run 2 vendors at the same time going against our metadata, go for it, no problem, right? So that's going to really facilitate switching. The costs, the risks get lower and lower. And that's really what we're after, right? We want collaboration, right? So, anybody can download, our bits and do their own build, and you can have Atlas. That's okay, right? And that's, our model, is based around that predicate of openness, right? Okay, kind of a fine point. We're going to do everything that we can to get this feature into our summer release. It may end up being in the subsequent release as either a maintenance release or another GA release after that, but it will be definitely in 2016. And this is this idea of inheritance, right? And this is one of these metadata management tools. The idea here is that now we can take something logical, like a department like Human Resources, and also combine that and have relationships to physical things, right? And because we have this relationship, one can be a parent and the other one can be a child. We can tag that level and it will cascade down. So this is hugely scalable, right? So you can do this for search, you can do it for all kinds of reporting, you can also do it for security, right? Later this year, we're going to also introduce a new feature called a taxonomical ACL, where we have access controls at the branch level, right? So because we have this inheritance, if you break a branch off the tree, stick it on somewhere else, it will inherit policies from that. So the management's a lot easier. And you can also have this inheritance handle many, assets, right? It's basically hugely scalable. And these are the kind of scalable tools you need to manage your data lake, right? Questions? Okay.
Uh,
Yes, sir.
so basically, because well, we have Internet of Things now, so we are dealing with sensor information from things, and
Yes.
we will have like thousands of sensors from a thing. We can build a structure using this basically and store it in Atlas.
Well, what do you want to store? Do you want to store the logical representation of that thing or the actual?
No, the logic,
Lo-
both actually.
So, we would recommend that you store it, but basically the design, the logical view of that, and then point back to the physical things. Because basically you're going to have what? It's going to land in HDFS or a bunch of files somewhere, right? And that location may change, but the attributes of that item, right? That sensor will have certain attributes, right? Location, maybe some metrics or some kind of profiling. So you can model that, keep that in Atlas, and then point back to where that might be. Because that's going to grow dramatically, right? So you can point back to a file path, perhaps, right? And then you can update that path as that data moves, right? So you'll probably have some kind of time series data, and at some point you're going to have a window of that data. It's going to get moved from hot to warm to cold. So you can articulate that in Atlas and as metadata, right?
Do you have something like, you said you have API, you have search, but we also look into, Apache Jena project and Spark UI queries?
Actually, I can't claim to be an expert in that area, so maybe one of my colleagues can address that at another, maybe at the end of the session. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Yes.
We've got multiple catalogs emerging here. I noticed, not you guys, I mean, you have a business catalog here, but Waterline's a catalog, Relations a catalog, Tamer has a catalog. And so with multiple technologies being used in and around HTTP, how do you see, I mean, it seems to be that you're kind of all competing for the same metadata.
On the face of it, that might be the case. Obviously I'm biased, and my point of view is that you can have them, but at some point, to really get value, you need to have a more comprehensive one. So we are actually working. So Waterline, when we integrate with Waterline, their data will be in Atlas, right? They create custom attributes that are specific to them in Atlas, so Atlas will become the superset there. Elation, they have a different model. They don't have quite a bit of visibility into Hadoop that we do, and that's pretty. I think that's pretty easy to substantiate. So I think combining the Elation data with Atlas is actually quite profitable, right? It's a very complementary data set, and we're working with them actually right now to do so. Quite a few friends over at Elation. And their domain, their space is a little bit different than ours, so there isn't that much overlap, right? The governance cases that they work on are really complementary to ours, right? They don't have the lineage in Hadoop, so matching it up really makes a lot of sense.
So if they all start to add in security,
Okay.
I guess the only answer here is to do the security and have them all use it, or are we going to end up with conflicting policies and classifications all over the place?
Okay. If we suppose that they integrate with Atlas, which Waterline does, and Elation will, then we can use one source, which will be Atlas at this point. In terms of security policies, specifically with Elation, they just don't have that capability even on the roadmap, I believe. I can't speak for them entirely, but from my conversations with them, they just don't have that investment yet.
What about other ODPI partners like IBM, for example, here? I mean, because clearly IBM has Guardium, which is all security related, which is different to Ranger.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's a very good point. And I think we may want to table perhaps that discussion to perhaps later, in as much as it's a little bit, it's going to require a longer answer. But the short answer, though, for everybody else is we're actively working with IBM. In fact, we have another meeting with them on next week to build better integration. They really want to have, everybody's going in the same direction, which is, they want to have better integration across your entire data platform, all the platforms, not just one, right? They realize customers, they don't care about the specific platforms. They just care about services, and they need to make sure they have continuity in whatever platform they use. IBM knows this quite well. They're very good in the metadata space. They don't have a lot of experience in Hadoop yet, but they're boy, they're working on it really hard, and we're working with them, right? We want them to contribute to our project, and they've actually dedicated quite a bit of engineering hours to it already, and I know that they're increasing that, specifically to the Atlas project, right? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Super. Okay, so we talked about this at length, so I'm not going to beat this one up too badly. But what I want to do is talk about this aspect from this dynamic access policy from the Atlas side. In our first session yesterday, we talked about it really from the Ranger side, and I kind of want to switch that and just kind of focus on the metadata side first. We're just going to assume that Ranger and all of its goodness is going to just take care of that stuff for us. And from a data steward point of view, this is what they're going to be looking at, right? They're going to be looking at data, classifying that data, tagging it properly, right? So this is kind of our architecture slide. It's a little busy, but what you can see is there's some magic that happens here through a notification framework. Atlas figures it out, and then we talk to Ranger, right? And Madan gave you kind of a thumbnail sketch of what Ranger does and how it's organized, right? But really, what we're doing is there's kind of a small agent in all of the different components that Ranger manages, right? And we're not actually talking to those pieces. We're just talking to this thing called the PDP resource cache, right? And really, that's the policy decision point. So we're just basically interacting with additional policies, right? So in the demo that we had earlier, and I can kind of gloss over it, we have a whole new way of managing our data in Ranger, and it's all based on metadata, right? Tag-based policies, right? So we can do things specifically like expiration and PII with tags quite easily, and that's what we have in the demo. You can download it and actually try it for yourself, right? So you can easily define these policies, and they're global for all tags, right? So what we're really talking about is, traditionally you have a group of people and a bucket of stuff, and you make some kind of rules. What we're doing now is we have a bucket of stuff, bucket of people, I guess, and we're attaching it to a tag. And that tag can be used by any data steward to tag or classify their data, right? And that's the takeaway. It's hugely scalable, and within a few seconds, Ranger will know about it and start enforcing that for active protection, right? And that active protection is the key, and that's something nobody else has. That's quite a big differentiator for us, right? Okay, so the policies, we went through these before, so I won't beat these up either, but really, that's what you want to focus on in terms of just getting a good example of what the power of this new tagging paradigm can provide. And there's a video that's also available, and it's actually at the end of these slides, so when you get the presentation, if you're interested, it's 9 minutes and 23 seconds. I just happen to know the guy who created it. Anyways, so just to kind of recap, Atlas, we provide metadata. Ranger, like other components within Hadoop, is going to benefit from that, and they're going to provide something like access and entitlements, right? This is kind of under the covers look at what happens. Any questions here? I'm not going to talk about this slide unless somebody has interest. Okay, good. Oh, I can do a quick demo here. Let's see what we're doing on time. Okay. All right, so this is our prototype UI, and in May, we will be changing this, right? So this is what you're going to see initially. This is just an asset search view, and we've already tagged some data, like for instance, we've already tagged some PII data. We know that certain columns have that. We can also understand by importing metadata from other systems if we have certain tables, right? So we can search for tables. We can also do free text, so anything that's associated with Hive. So you can do all kinds of searches, right? But here we can define a tag. So if the tag doesn't already exist, if it's not imported, you can go ahead and create one, right? And then you can add different attributes. And you can add as many attributes as you like. Oh, there we go. So for instance, I added country, so you can use our geography. Oh, too many there. You can use our geography capability to do things like data domicile protection, right? So for instance, if you import data from another system and it has this notion of country, so for instance, let's take Germany. Data that is generated in Germany has to stay in Germany. So because we understand that, we could do that through tagging or a taxonomy. Now we can enforce certain rules. So you can only access that data in Germany, right? So these are really powerful things that you can do with metadata and hierarchies.
In UI, do you support structures? Because usually, like when we have 10,000 items in tags, do you have some other visualization?
Sorry, say again?
In terms of visualization,
Yeah.
we have like 8,000 items and to visualize on the screen, you can have it in a list and make it search. Sometimes we would like to have a structure to visualize.
Yeah. Gosh, I wish you asked that question in our other session. So in the business catalog for visualization, obviously we have pagination, right? But we have InPlace filters. So we assume that you know something about the data, and by getting the results, you can constantly filter them. So you can filter them by a number of different attributes. If they have some kind of tag already, we can search by country, or if you have a notion of time, we can do some matching there. And you can start winnowing that data down. Typically in our interviews for that specific question, most of the time when they bring data in, they're able to do some kind of rough tagging. It's usually by location, by department, or time. And those are pretty easy. So that's something, you know, as a best practice you want to use, right? You have to, you can facilitate that quite with little cost when you bring the data in, and you get quite a bit of benefit from the analytics side.
If it's, again, back to the Internet of Things, if I have an engine which has 800 sensors,
Sure.
I would like to see the engine in a structure, you know, and it matches.
Sure, you can model that, right? And you have different attributes or different properties, right? And so when you bring that data in, just make sure that, you know, we're able to capture that. That's, you know, I would think that that's probably not a huge effort, right? Because you understand the structure of that data, right? For instance, temperature, or something like a measure of a fluid has certain properties to it, right? So you want to make sure you model it correctly, right, to do some additional analysis, just to facilitate analysis later. So if you're going to do that kind of stuff already for semantic, you know, data quality checks anyway, to make sure things are not outliers, that's what you're going to be doing with sensor data. Why not just take that information and also capture it as metadata, right? I mean, because typically when you have IoT and you're doing that kind of thing, you're looking for pattern and analysis, and you want the outliers, right? That's really what you're after. So you're doing that analysis anyway, right?
Yeah, but I want structure from all of my data, so I want to have an overview of the layout of the data that I have. Because let's say I have an engine, and then I have different companies delivering me part of the engine, so I want to provide them access to the different part of the engine. And
Sure. So we can talk about that. That's more of a modeling exercise, I think. Yeah, so we can support that. We can talk about that later in terms of the specifics, but definitely you can model any structure. That's really what this is, the flexibility of what we design. Is there another question?
Yeah, I have a question. So you've defined the governance in here from the data point of view. What about the process point of view? Do we assume that processes are on a level, on a parent level, regarding the data? Is that the model that we are aiming for?
Right now, a way you can implement that easily is to just use tag-based security. So you can have a tag, basically, which will prohibit anybody from accessing any data, and you can remove that, or you can have different gates, right? So certain departments can have an associated tag, and you can create that assignment. Kind of like our PII example, where we used HR. Only HR has access to PII. Well, you can have one that's related to a country or a department, right?
But it does mean that in some manner we're going to replicate the tags and giving them different
So for instance,
policies?
yeah.
Or
So does your company use Calibra, for instance?
no?
Okay.
Not really.
So there is a workflow, let's say, and there's let's say a compliance or a legal workflow. Somebody has to sign off that, you know, you can share this data, this customer data, right? So, you know, you typically don't want to release that for in its state for analysis, right? You may want to do some encryption or obfuscation prior to letting it, go into the data lake. So you can assign a tag to it, right? And then you can establish a view of that data, and that other view will not have that tag, and therefore they can have access to it. So that's not the cleanest solution, but that's something that you can implement right away that is scalable. So Calibra or the other tools like Waterline or Data Guys, they can actually do that tagging. Or you can do it manually, or you can do it programmatically through a script, right? So there's ways around that. Right. Okay. Questions? Anything else? Okay. All right. Actually, we're starting to run out of time here, but I just wanted to show you the tagging aspect of it from the Atlas side. So really you can tag things quite easily. You'll be able to pull up new tags, type of country, and you can save these attributes. And then you can go and query these and get information about it, right? As it's binding to that entity, you can create these attributes. Or you can have no attributes. You can just leave it blank. It's up to you, right? We want to give you that flexibility. So if you have a data quality measure, you're tracking, domain of values, distribution, or some kind of data quality score that you've calculated somehow, you can stick it in there, right? And now your metadata is getting richer and richer. You've imported stuff, and now you're just adding to it. Yeah. Question, sir?
Is it possible to have, obviously the hierarchies within a taxonomy,
Yes.
but could I have multiple routes through the down to lower levels rather than just one?
So we actually had a very lively discussion on this exact topic. And right now we have one route. And the reason why we do that is we need to have proper context, and we need to be authoritative, right? So if I have multiple routes, then we could have potentially a conflict, right? So we want to always maintain a strict hierarchy there, right? So one of the things we do is when we define any object or entity, we have this notion of context, and that's how we prevent duplication, right? So it's not so bad now, but when we introduce this notion of inheritance and taxonomical ACLs, where we are inheriting permissions, it becomes a little bit more complicated, especially if you want to break off a branch from one part of the tree and shove it on another part. Let's say you have a combination of departments or companies. We can accommodate that really quickly, but if we have multiple roots, that becomes a problem.
And I can have multiple tags on the same thing?
Of course, you can have infinite number of tags. Probably not a good idea, but you could. Yeah.
Sorry,
Oh, yes, sir.
do you mind just clicking on that table there?
Which one?
Or the one that is back. This is here on the taxonomies page.
Yep. So, we're capturing metadata already. So, we have a concept. So we'll have in the other UI, we'll have a conceptual view, but you can figure out what's going on. You get the process, and this is dynamic. So if I were to go into Hive and do a create table, you'd see the lineage, right? Right. So obviously, you can see the lineage. You can get the schema dynamically. You can see the tags associated with that. And so because of that, now you can have other systems leverage this as a reference, right? So other systems can now be more efficient, and you can have consistent tagging and taxonomy throughout your whole enterprise. And that's really what we're after, right? It's really it's kind of critical to make sure that you have that consistency for, large-scale data management, right? Yes, sir. Yes.
Do you support versioning?
Do we support?
Versioning.
Oh, versioning. Wow, you've been listening, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness. We do support versioning right now. It's really at the audit kind of log level right now. What we do is we don't actually delete anything. We just change the state of that thing. The issue really becomes, for a compliance tool, you really need to be able to reproduce the landscape at a given point in time, right? And all of the related pieces, right? So, you might have some kind of alter table that happened on some date, and you need to know exactly when that happened and all the relevant pieces that connect to it. So we do have versioning. Right now we have to do it through logs and some correlations. The next release, we will actually have a visualization piece of it that will actually point back to that version of it. It requires us to do something, so it requires some work with the graph database, but actually the graph database uniquely can do this better than other ways of implementing that. So we've really thought long and hard about that. In fact, our friends at IBM have actually helped us in that effort. It's a big deal for us. Versioning is a hot topic. So we'll have this really cool time machine kind of capability where we can actually move that point of reference backwards and forwards, right? Another gentleman earlier actually talked about future state, which we actually have not embraced yet, but it's a kind of a really interesting notion. I'd actually be interested if other people in the room are interested, where they want to create some kind of activity or entity in the future and future date it, right? So it will, land at a certain point in time. And they would do this for, release planning and other things like that, right? Or, if you're going to roll out a new product and you want this metadata and those objects to exist at some point, and you want to coordinate all that work, right? So is that something that other people are interested in? Okay, well, maybe you should get into the roadmap then. Say again?
So you made this example with the organization. The organization will change, it's not mostly already.
That's a good point. That's a good point. If you know an organization will change at a point in time, it would be nice to be able to get that set up and figure out the relationships in advance. Yes, sir?
It's also true of like product data that two versions of a product could be out there at the same time, and therefore you need to be able to go to whatever version is in play.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. That's a good point. That's a good use case. Okay, I think we're... Yeah, I think we're close to... I'm not getting booted yet. We've got like a few minutes. I'm going to actually start shutting down, but if there's additional questions, I'll be happy to answer them, and then perhaps we can take the conversation to the lobby if you have additional ones. I'll be sharing this presentation, and if you go to the last page of it, we actually will have the VM that you can download. There's a tutorial, some blog postings. The guy who wrote the white paper is right back there. You can ask him all the questions you want. His name is Saeed. And we have our landing page, and then we'll also have a video that actually points back to our tag-based security, right?
Do you mind going back one slide there?
Oh,
To capture the-
there you go. This is, if you just go here, it will point back to the other stuff. Okay. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, yeah, thank you.